So getting back to high blood pressure, I wanted to kind of tie in a bunch of comments that I got, not just about blood pressure, but just about building the channel in general with you guys involved from the start. And I got the best response ever. And I want to shout out to Erlyn McIntyre, who says, "It seems to me these days we could use to be connected to our true selves. Is there an avenue in traditional Chinese medicine to help that happen? Another way to put it, perhaps, is overcoming anxiety, finding the peace of the soul, how to connect to the qi." Oh, I love you and I love you too, Erlyn. She says, love your work. Anyhow, yeah, you couldn't ask a more powerful question about Chinese medicine, which is a deep, deep well of wisdom and spiritual insight. So then we go to the actual Instagram comments that I got about high blood pressure. Rhea T. Fox says, "Time to slow down, change some habits." Cheryl Always 49 says, "Stress." On Facebook, Justin Nguyen says, "Salt-free diet." Jeff Bowen also echoes his sentiments about a salt-free diet. Kimberly Kiki Newkaiser says, "Stress activation and cortisol." Brandy Barker Parker says she got her heart rate and her blood pressure down to 139/90, which is saying a lot because she suffered from high blood pressure. So anyhow, I just want to respond to that and say something that I don't think has ever been said quite this way. The number one most insidious cause of high blood pressure is the repression of all your emotions. And that causes you to seek unhealthy ways of feeling a sense of joy, of feeling happiness. And that causes you to do all kinds of naughty, not so loving, not so nurturing, selfish occupations where you want to have control over, push button, ooh ah kind of instant gratification, that sort of sickness, that's so pervasive in our modern society, and no country is exempt from this. The heart in Chinese medicine is the house of the soul, or the shen, or the spirit. It's where your soul resides. And there's different emotions that can affect different organs, but basically any emotion that you have that is overloading your system will affect the heart organ. And then it goes on to specifically affect different organs. Like for the liver, anger, frustration, irritability, resentment, that affects the liver. Senses of indignation, injustice, just pet peevishness, that affects the liver. The kidney is affected by fear, and it could be irrational fear too, things that haven't happened. Moving along to the lung organ, which has to do with loss, sadness, and the spleen, and by virtue of its partnership, the stomach, they have to do with worry and anxiety about the thoughts that cycle through your head and maybe sometimes never really get answered, and they cause you a certain amount of qi stagnation. Your energy or your qi doesn't move, your life force doesn't move throughout your body, and that causes all kinds of buildup and backup and exhaustion, ultimately. And then you have the heart. So here's the tricky thing. What specific emotion affects the heart? And you're going to think that this is really negative, but we were actually taught in Chinese medicine that overexcitement and joy can be pathological or can be disease causing. Now, before you get up all at arms and say that, how could you possibly cite joy or excitement as a cause of disease? I want you to think about it. Anything that is too excessive will overload your system. Stick your finger in a socket. Electricity is wonderful. I wouldn't want to live without it. But just imagine that overload running through your body. It's neither bad nor good, but in excess, it can cause disease. So the kind of joy I'm talking about is not derived from knowing yourself and being so completely connected to everything you believe in about spirituality That's not the kind of joy that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of joy that comes from a whole different attitude towards avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. And that has to do with that live fast, die young kind of mentality, where you have to always be doing something that sends you or puts you over or through the roof. You have to always have a high, you have to always be happy. And it's that inflated kind of happiness. It's not a true happiness that comes from being in service to people that you love, or people that are in need, or being connected to others because you can be emotionally vulnerable around or with each other, or just being completely free of the things that trip you up in your head that cause you to fixate on emotions that are negative or that don't facilitate the flow of chi in your body. That's the kind of joy or overexcitement. It's false joy. It's not founded on, or it's not substantial based on good things. It comes ultimately from some avoidance or some kind of void that you're trying to fill, some kind of insecurity, something that you're compensating for. And what you do towards compensating can pretty much make or break you. So if you have healthy habits like, expressing your anger through art or creative outlets, or you deal with your sadness not by doing symbolic gestures of closure, that you've moved on. When you've lost someone, you've moved on because you got a tattoo, or you cut your hair, or you quit your job, or you decided to walk the earth. Those are all really symbolic gestures of closure. But to me, that doesn't really address the grief, or that doesn't really allow you to keep that rhythm, that flow, the taking in, the letting go of bonds, forming bonds, detaching from them, forming them and detaching, like the breath, like the rhythm of the lungs. Breathe in, breathe out. And it certainly doesn't calm any kind of mental tizzing in your head that leads to anxiety, worrying about this or that, that sort of vague, unsettled feeling of not knowing. And then you fill your head with all kinds of knowing, and none of it is necessarily wisdom. That's worry, that's anxiety, that affects your spleen and your stomach right here in this upper left hand. I don't know if you can see me in the frame. Upper left hand quadrant. It makes the sandwich right there. So while each organ is affected particularly in a certain way by an emotion, the heart registers the hit of all of those emotions together. And so, it's more than just electrical node conductivity. It's more than just the machinery that we know and that we can identify, that we can see and visually grasp. So when you're dealing with chronic blood pressure, stubborn high blood pressure, extremely high blood pressure, and you want to tell someone to change their diet, to start exercising again, how are they going to do that, really? I mean, that is like the very tip of the iceberg. But the foundation of it came initially from there's all these emotions that you're just so afraid to feel and to have. They're so awful, you do anything to not feel them. And actually, the most healing thing is to release them. And even if you have to feel them on the way out, at least you have that assurance that in the release, you will eventually get that relief. And so when I approach high blood pressure, especially one that's particularly stubborn, or one that's heavily medicated and well managed or maintained, I have to really, really approach with caution, because there are some deep emotional traumas, some events, life-changing events, life-shattering events that people are suffering from. And it's the memory of those events and the emotions that they stir up that are really pressurized or repressed and kept inside of you. Now, there are some cases where a patient is physically not in any condition to express an emotion. Like, if you have high blood pressure in the 200s over 110s, you're not going to tell that person to do some shouting, screaming, anger releasing therapy, because that's just going to give them basically a heart attack or a stroke. So you'll have to kind of be a little bit sensible about this, but just to recognize that all this avoidance, all this repression is only creating more of a kind of pressure that will never, ever, ever adequately be addressed with chemicals. And that goes for natural medicines as well. And while they may do wonders at getting some of the numbers that you want some of the time, after a while, their host of side effects or their unwanted effects will start to build up and accumulate in your system, or the force of that pressure will just completely refuse to let up. And eventually you're going to have to deal with it, and you're going to have to face that. Now, does that mean that we don't take medicine or supplements or natural botanicals and medicinals to try to help with the symptoms? No, absolutely. You should stay on your regimen, but just know that there's a deeper depth that you have to go to understanding this problem and where it really comes from in order to start unraveling that tangled ball of nerves and emotions and psychological programs that are all tangled up and causing your energy to not flow smoothly throughout your body and for things to build up. And then there's all of the toxic habits that you pick up along the way, and they add more clutter to your system, every system: digestive, respiratory, circulatory, endocrine, the elimination routes as well. Everything gets backed up. The difference of going about it by trying to dance around that emotional repression versus understanding that that is the pressure, that can make or break your success in terms of dealing with chronic, stubborn blood pressure. Now, I'm not going to try to convince you. If you feel like you are doing just great with your current strategy, and some of it involves medication, I can't comment on that. That's not my area. I don't prescribe medication, and it's quite frankly not my scope of practice to comment on that. But I do know that the people who reach a point where they want to deepen their experience of health, they come to me. And at that point, it's a question of, what are you doing with those medicines really? If you're applying a solution to a chronic problem for 2 to 3 years, I could understand. 5 years, okay. Maybe you might not have any side effects. Maybe you're doing just fine. 10 years goes by. Now, let me just put it this way. If I had a problem that I was mulling over for 10 years, and I was applying a solution, however satisfactory that solution may be, I'm applying it for 10 years. What does that say about the problem, and how will I understand it? Moreover, what does that say about the true success of that strategy, that I have to keep employing it over and over for 10 years? Okay. All you have to do to prove that it's not a real solution is stop taking it and see what happens. Do you or don't you then have a condition of high blood pressure? I know for a fact that if I was going to consider myself cured or healed or resolved of a high blood pressure condition, that would probably lead to my not having to be dependent on anything, not on any kind of treatment, not on any kind of natural or synthetic oral medication or something that you take by mouth. if you're using dietary means to fix that, to me, that's a little bit different. That's you changing your life, and that's kind of what this is all about. And you found a way to deal with the things that have pressurized you or internalized that pressure. And so you were motivated to work on just living in a way that is loving towards yourself. So amen, power to you. I'm happy that you found that. But for the vast majority of people who used to come see me, I've never really known anyone, or trying some sort of medicative strategy towards their blood pressure, I've never really known anyone to not be on it chronically or for years and years and years. So I will tell you, and I'll end with this, and I'll share you one success story. There's a patient of mine who I dearly love, and this patient was a big burly guy, real strong guy, kind of afraid of him for a lot. As long as I've known him, I've been afraid of him, and there was nothing to be afraid of. He's super gentle giant, heart of gold. And I remember he came to me at a point where his blood pressure was so severe that even the most suppressive, aggressive medications were not budging those numbers. In fact, his kidney numbers were going down. So there's certain markers that they look at for when your blood pressure medication is backfiring on your kidneys, and that's your GFR, or your glomerular filtration rate. So it's how fast things move through your kidneys and filter out. So when it starts slowing down, that's not a good thing. That means your kidney's taking a hit from the side effects of those blood pressure medications. And doctors know this and they watch this, so I'm not trying to rile you up about that or anything. But anyhow, they were trying their best with him, and it got down to the point where his kidney function was so low that the next step would have been dialysis. And at that point, I had also tried some herbal medicines, and they barely held him, along with the acupuncture. It was like, thanks, I feel great. And then everything would just shoot right back up, you know? So I had to approach it at the chi level. I had to understand that this was a chi thing. And this is a very gentlemanly, gentle giant. So I knew that underneath that calm and underneath that reserve was a reserve or a repression of a lot of emotions. Maybe not necessarily really twisted, dark ones, but a lot was built up in there, and it didn't have the freedom to be released. And I didn't feel close enough to that person to really open up, you know, a conversation about what were the experiences or any kind of traumas that went into that. And I kind of had an idea actually what some of them might be. And I knew that that was private and deeply personal. So my young, late 20-something, early 30-year-old open-mindedness received this download. I taught him how to enter into the breath, and really enter into the breath, to really fully experience the inhale. A long, luxurious, almost indulgent inhale. And then to pause in between and just to experience the deprivation of oxygen or the release of carbon dioxide. Sorry, I've been reading a lot of nutritional stuff. Carbon dioxide, just long enough so that the exhale becomes so deeply rewarding and releasing and refreshing. And then I didn't think anything of it. And I sort of, you know, bowed out at that point. I said, hey, you know, I've done everything I can for you, and I just let it be. And I caught up with this person like years later. Years later. And it's always what, weddings or funerals, right? That you see people. So it was at a funeral, and this person comes up to me and says, I said, how you doing? You look great. I was kind of shocked, like, you're not gone, you know, because blood pressure that high is really scary. So he tells me, hey, I still do that breathing that you taught me. And I had forgotten. I completely forgot that that's what I told him. Because a lot of times when I get what I call a download, I feel like it's not me. And I almost have to kind of step out of the picture for that to come through. So sometimes I have a hard time immediately remembering the things that I say. because it's almost like it's being said through me and not because of me. So I said, oh yeah. And then I remembered, I was like, yeah, that's right. I did teach him how to, but I only taught him like once, and I only went over it really briefly. And I said, so are you still on all that medication? And he's like, nope. And he smiled so big. And I said, and how's your blood pressure? And he goes, fine, fine. And I said, all right, I'm so happy for you. So there, that's my take on blood pressure. I was going to do a video with some acupressure points that you can press, but you won't be caused to do it. If you're going to go in that little mouse on a wheel game where you think if you just do everything outside and around that and you don't really address the insidious or the invisible causes of pressure, the things that cause you to feel pressurized, I don't know that you're going to keep up with anything. I mean, it's going to be the next person that impresses you, the next person that gets you all fired and jazzed up. But let's just be real here. You got some heavy pressure inside of there and it wants to be released, but you have to be sensitive about how you do it, because chances are there's some really bad things that happened in your life that cause you to want to run away from feeling what you feel when you talk about it or you remember those things. And there's therapists for that. But while you're going through that, yes, please still keep up with your doctor. Please, if you're seeing an alternative healthcare practitioner like an acupuncturist like myself, or a naturopath, or a chiropractor, or a massage therapist, or somebody that does, emotional release work, still do take care of the body. Start looking into and researching different thoughts on food. I really wish I could get everyone away from dieting. I really feel like we don't understand food nearly enough to go over that and skip to these very surgically precise, very, tunnel visioned diets, these extremely restrictive or elimination based diets. We don't even really understand food anymore because our food supply has changed so much. The way that we grow food has changed so much. The way that we regard the eating or the dining experience has changed so much. So I feel like we need to just go back to understanding food. That's too big of a topic for me to discuss right now. Obviously, it would be hugely rewarding in terms of blood pressure. But the only thing people seem to know about a high blood pressure diet is to lower your intake of salt. So I've got a lot of work to do when I actually do address, some dietary tips for high blood pressure. And they'll definitely be more than just limiting your salt intake. Some thoughts, lots of thoughts, but they're not just theoretical sharings. These are actually experiences that ordinary people like you and me have gone through. And thank goodness that traditional Chinese medicine always brings everything back to the qi, or that life-giving, life-sustaining force, that motivational force that makes everything happen, and that can sometimes be misled or misguided, misappropriated, and completely drained. So there's a lot that we need to understand when it comes to our own personal path and how we navigate through the challenges to our qi. Okay, so that's just high blood pressure. And I think I kind of touched upon what Erlyn had talked about getting back to your true self. So you're never going to be coming from the essence of who you are if you avoid those feelings that you're trapped inside, because your true essence is trapped along with that. So that gets freed up too, and that's where you experience true healing. Okay, so I hope I've answered some of your questions, and I know there's going to be a lot more, and I welcome them. Always just keep in mind that this is not a how-to. This is not a guarantee that you're going to be able to get it right away, just with these insights. These insights are rather deep and profound, and you really need all the help you can get, honestly, to not be hit and missing it out there and be scattered in your efforts, especially if your time is compressed, your funds are limited, and you have a lot of other things coming at you at the same time. So I'm here to shed whatever light I can out in the darkness and uncertainty out there. So mahalo for listening. Comment away. Okay.